Hi, my name is Ben Williams. I am a Texas broker in El Paso, Texas. I run a team called the War Team. And due to the recent changes to the contract effective on July 1st, I'm going to refresh our training in terms of the 1-to-4 family contract, resale contract. And I'm going to do it in 3-page increments. So we're going to jump right into it. So let's jump into page 1. So the first part is the parties. Simply put, who's buying and who's selling. That's it. Make sure the names are spelled correct. Make sure the entities are correct. And make sure they line up with your IDs and paperwork for all the corporations. If a corporation is involved, make sure everything's legit. And you want to verify the legal spelling of every party inside of here. It does matter. Section 2, the property itself defines what is being sold. And the first portion in 2A is going to have the legal address. You'll find the legal address in your county records or sometime in the MLS or in RPR, some of those sources. The first portion, it gives the lot and block. You'll find that, put that in there, and then the legal address that goes with it. And then you have to put the county in there. And then what is known as, which is the address that most people see. 2B is improvements. Improvements meaning that anything attached permanently to the house, that is considered part of the sale unless it's identified otherwise. And it gives a great example of all the things that they have examples of as far as built into the house. They also put some things in there like garage door openers. They put some things in there, lighting fixtures, chandeliers, water softeners. And I believe because at some point in time, someone tried to take those things out of there. They even have wall-to-wall carpeting and mirrors and things like that. So look at this and make sure you read the items. And if it's something built to the house or built attached to the house, then it's supposed to be part of the sale unless it's otherwise agreed upon that people are taking it, right? 2C is accessories. They got in there all the things that goes with things that may not be a permanently attached, but it still goes with the house. You got curtains, curtain rods, window units, pool equipment. What else is in there? They have drapes and they have controls. And then it also puts in there sellers' transferable rights to the software and application used to access and control improvements is also in there. So any transferable right that the seller has to software is supposed to be transferred over to the buyer. And with the access being there, like passwords and codes and things like that's supposed to be part of it. And I tell our agents is that you got to do that before. A couple weeks out from closing, make sure those things are addressed. You bring it to surface to the listing agent, to the sellers if you're on the buyer side of that. And if you're a listing agent, you want to get out in front of it and actually tells the buyer's agent, hey, we're going to give you all the codes and all the access to the software that we have with the house. You want to do that beforehand. I can't stress that enough. I've seen so many agents kind of jack that up and wait till the last moment, and then people don't have access, and it causes problems. E, reservations. Any reservations for oil, gas, or other mineral rights is saying, okay, it's going to convey in this actual process and needs an additional addendum to reserve those rights. 3, sales price. Simple math. Cash portion plus finance amount has got to equal the sales price. In this case, if you look on the actual contract, we're saying the cash portion is going to be $8,400. The finance amount is going to be $231,600, totaling $240,000. And we put in there, identified it was going to be third party. Now, if it's loan assumption or seller finance, you would check whatever's applicable. But the key here, the sum of A and B must equal C in this portion of it. Now, I could tell you one thing that happens. You'll have buyers that's doing hard money loans, and they will want you to show the seller that it's a cash deal. That's wrong. That's any loan that's going to be in this process. You are supposed to, Section 4, leases. If there is a lease on the property, this is where the seller is going to tell the buyer. And the different types of leases got residential leases, fixture leases, and natural resource leases. Whichever applies, you check it off and you get the appropriate lease addendum to specify what's going on with it, right? And then the lease addendum is going to identify the parameters of lease, the monies involved with the lease and things like that. So the buyer's informed of what this lease is all about, right? So let's go to section 5, 5A particularly. 5A is delivering of earnest money. And in delivery on the earnest money means that there's supposed to be, the buyer has 3 days after effective date to deliver both earnest money and option money to an escrow. If the third day lands on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday, the next day that's not a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday is supposed to be it. And it's got to be into the title company before the title company closes, right? So if you're doing this and your third day ends on that one of those days, you must do the math. Now, when you're doing the math, the day of execution is day 0. The following day is day 1, then day 2, and then day 3. So whatever day you execute the contract, that's day 0. The next day is day 1. All right. As you look into other things with this, it says buyer authorized the escrow agent to release option fee to the seller immediately. It's non-refundable and credited to the sales price at closing. Now let's talk about the option fee for a second. It also goes and says, okay, in this case, we got an option fee of $150, and we have a earnest amount for $1,500. Total together, $1,650, right? It'll be a total of $1,650. That check is supposed to be for $1,650 or wired $1,650 to the title company that identified there. And it's supposed to be for $1,650. Again, it could be one payment. Now, of that payment, when it comes in, if you read here in section 3, right there, it says the amount of escrow received under this paragraph shall be applied first to the option fee and then to earnest money or additional earnest money. So say, for example, you told your buyer, hey, look, get $1,650 over to True Title of El Paso and take it down there. But the buyer went to the bank, got some type of cashier check and only got it for $1,500. Took it to the title company and put that into the title company for the thinking that he was going to be paying his earnest money. The way this reads, of that $1,500 that he got, $150 of it would go towards the option fee first, meaning that the earnest money will be short. And now if the earnest money is short and never actually really paid, the seller has the option to terminate the contract until those earnest money is fully paid. So it behooves the buyer and yourself as a buyer's agent to make sure this is done right and get the right amounts. All right. Let's go to 5B, termination of option. It says for a nominal consideration, the receipt of which seller acknowledges the buyer agreement to pay the option fee within the time required. Seller grants the buyer the unrestricted right to terminate this contract by giving notice of the buyer to the seller within blank days. I put 12 days here of the effective date. It says notices under this paragraph must be given by 5 p.m. local time of where the property is located. All right, so you have to have this in by 5 p.m. If the buyer gives notice of termination within the time prescribed, the option fee will not be refunded to the buyer, and the escrow agent will release any option fee remaining with the escrow agent to the seller, and earnest money will be refunded. So in this case, what this really means is the buyer has 12 days after the effective date to terminate for any reason whatsoever. And if they do that, obviously by 5 p.m. on the 12th day, I should say, the buyer loses the option money. However, the buyer's earnest money will be returned. Time is of the essence, and notice must be given by 5 p.m. of the local time on that last day, not at midnight. Now it goes on. If you look at C through E, there's some real risk there. So look at C, failure to timely deliver earnest money. If buyer fails to deliver the earnest money within the time required, seller may terminate the contract or exercise seller's remedies under paragraph 15, or both by providing notice to the buyer before the buyer delivers the earnest money. All right. Now it says before the buyer delivers earnest money. Now, we have situations where on the third day, the earnest money is not turned in, but the option money is turned in, and say the buyer wants to terminate. So if they turn the option money in, then they could still terminate, right? Now, if it's the other way around and they haven't turned any option money in, or they haven't turned any earnest money in, the buyer doesn't have an option. And the seller could come out and demand for that earnest money, right? So it's really important to turn in that option. Probably the most important thing to do is to have the option to terminate, is to turn that in. Or the seller could seek remedies through paragraph 15. Fails to deliver option money. If no dollar amount is stated as an option fee. If buyer fails to deliver option fee within the time required, buyer shall not have the unrestricted right to terminate under paragraph 5. So that means a lot. All right. So we've had people in situations, just a couple of weeks ago, we had a lady in a situation where she never turned the option money in and she terminated, but she didn't have the unrestricted right to terminate because she didn't have an option fee. She didn't turn it in, and the seller demanded the earnest money be turned in. So please understand, it's not an option. If you have that in there, you need to really make sure that is turned in for that option fee. All right, let's go to the next one. Section 6, title policy survey. Now, Section 6 is probably 2 pages of the contract, the biggest section. So it's a lot going on here, and I'm going to do a deep dive in which it's about the title policy and survey. All right, so 6A, plain English, seller buys buyer insurance on the title. An owner title policy protects the buyer against any title defects, someone else claiming that they have ownership into it, unpaid liens, or forged deeds. That's what the title policy is protecting the buyer from. And the seller typically, most likely, is negotiable, but seller buys the buyer insurance for that. So who pays? Could be seller, could be buyer, could be both, right? They could split it, right? If you did split it where you have both marks checked, in special provisions, you would identify what percentage the seller would pay and what percentage would the buyer repay. All right, standard exceptions, 1 through 9. All right, standard exceptions, meaning that these are the exceptions to this policy. However, in 8, it reads, will be amended or deleted from title policy, or will be amended to read shortages in areas at the expense of buyer and seller. Now, depending on what side you're on, it's beneficial for the buyer in this case that if there is some of these things that's not accepted or short or some problems, then it would be amended and fixed at the seller's expense, right? That would be the best course of action if you were on the buyer's side. And also, on the other side of that, if you're a seller and you have those problems, why would you want to not fix those anyway so a buyer could have full ownership and not have any liens or any forced deeds and things like that? So be careful about this. I've seen people where they're insisting that will not be amended or deleted from the title policy. And I'm like, okay, why are you so stuck on that? I would raise a red flag on that one if I was a buyer agent to listing agent, if that was the case. Let's go to 6B, the title commitment. It says within 20 days after the title company receives a copy of the contract, seller shall furnish the buyer commitment to title insurance, which is called the commitment. In short, it's saying, hey, look, seller must furnish the buyer a title commitment, and that's what it has to do, right? If it's late, it says there, if it's late, the deadline is automatically extended to 15 days or 3 days prior to closing, whichever is earlier. If it's still not delivered, it goes on, says buyer may terminate and get their earnest money back. If there's no title commitment ever delivered, buyer can terminate and get their earnest money back. It says here, buyer pays the exception documents, they must pay for copies. A cost often forgotten to mention to buyers if they wanted copies. Let's get to 6C. Talk about the survey. All right. Who is providing the survey and who is paying for it? That's what 6C is about. There's 3 options. Option 1, seller will try to use the survey already that they have. And if it can't be used, someone will have to pay for a new one, depending on what's in the contract. In this case, we're saying 5 days, the seller will try to use the existing survey, right? And if the title company or buyer's lender does not accept the existing survey or the affidavit or declaration, buyer shall obtain a new survey. And right here it says seller or buyer expense, whoever had it, right? Section 2 is basically the buyer is responsible for getting the survey themselves, if you check that. And then section 3, the seller agrees upfront to pay for a new survey. Sometimes there are lenders that just requires new surveys. They don't allow a buyer to get an old survey, existing survey. In this case, these things are all negotiable, could be buyer or seller, but this is what this means if you're going to be doing it. So I got down at the bottom, asked 2 questions. Does the seller have an existing surveyor with a T47? If yes, use option 1. If no, go to 2. Who's paying for the new survey? Buyer pays, use 2. Seller pays, use number 3. Pretty much easy as that. Let's go into objections. When I explain it to a potential buyer, I typically say it's your review and object period. Meaning that if you found out that you couldn't do something with this property that would stop you from buying it, you would object to buying it, right? So that's the type of things that goes into that activity. I've seen things where people put short-term rentals. I've seen people put park my RV, things of that nature. If the covenants inside the subdivision didn't allow that, and you found out later once you got the title commitment and everything back, and you saw everything that was there, and you found out you couldn't do that, then you could object. The buyer has to send the seller a written notice describing the objection within the deadline of the contract. Once the seller receives the buyer's written objection, the seller has 15 days to try to correct it. Now, if there's certain things that can't be cured, right? In this case, if we talk about this, can't do short-term rentals, that's can't be cured. And if so, the buyer would be able to get their earnest money back and move forward that way and close out this transaction. So read this and make sure you understand it, because it does matter in a lot of different ways. And it does have some timelines in there. And even says that the seller has 15 days to cure. It says within 50 days after the seller receiving an objection, cure period, the closing date will be extended as necessary. If the objections are not cured within the cure period, the buyer may, by delivery notice to seller within 5 days after the end of the cure period, terminate the contract and earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. Buyer can waive the objections, right? Say, okay, I'm going to still go for it anyway, right? Or if objections, if the commitment or survey is revised or any new exception documents is delivered, buyer may object to any new matter revealed in the revised commitment or survey or new objection documents within the same time period. So there's a lot going on with that paragraph. It is huge. So keep that in mind of what that is for. 6E1, title notices. Think of this as the buyer's review and object period again. And when it gets into 6E1, you're thinking of a couple different things here. It says, hey, the title commitment, you review it, and if there's any problems, you have a certain amount of time to object. It also says, okay, the buyer has 2 ways to verify ownership of the property: the review of abstract of title with an attorney, which is probably not what you're going to do because it's expensive, or purchase a title policy. If the buyer's getting a title insurance, they should review the title commitment as soon as possible. There is only a limit time to object to title issues in paragraph 60. That's what the basic means. And then the last paragraph there, plain English, talking about membership to a property ownership, which is a HOA. This is your time to identify what HOA is there, if there is one. And simply put, if there's an HOA, your buyer saying, yes, we're joining it, and there may be some expenses with it. And if there is, you should have the TREC promulgated addendum for property subject to mandatory membership in a property owners association with this. And in that, it spells out what is going on, who's paying what in that addendum to make sure the buyer understands what's happening. This section also says if it is in a property owners association, that the buyer is entitled to all of the association documents and covenants and rules and regulations. That's what this paragraph is saying as well, if it is part of a home association. All right. So those are the first 3 pages. Stay tuned for the next 3 pages. We will be doing them shortly.